So here we are after 5 episodes of how to make Among Us in Unity. We've gone a long way, but I have one secret for you. We're not approaching the end, or at least not very soon. What we've looked up until this moment is how to set up a small multiplayer game, how to connect to Photon, how to create a lobby, and how to create simple tasks as seen in the Among Us game. But what we discussed up until this point were things that were isolated from each other, each one in their own bubble. What we are going to do today is trying to put everything together. Yes, exactly. We need at some point to make a game out of this, so the time has come. I'm Adrian and welcome to Redefine Gamedev. This is where the game dev starts. I have two things to announce before start going into the tutorial. The first one, if you haven't joined yet, join the Discord server Redefiners Gang, where we discuss game dev all day. Last week I announced the launch of a new asset pack from Redefine called Survival Space Multiplayer. It had its first sales, so with this I want to thank you all for supporting this channel. I want to tell you about what's in the pack, so if you are interested you can also get it yourself in the description below. It's basically the full project that we are going to do in this channel, but it will have something extra, of course, which is also specified in the projects page that you can check yourself. And also every package owner will get early access features before the video containing the tutorial for the Among Us series hits YouTube. The pack right now is 50% off. So if you haven't got it yet, you should get it because the full price is $7.99 and currently it's selling at $3.99. With that said, let's get started. In this video, we'll see how to put everything together from start to finish. Basically, what we need is to have a complete sequence from main menu to the lobby and lastly to the game. If we can accomplish this, this means we can have the first pieces of the puzzles of actually creating a full game. While doing this, we'll also be looking into how to improve the lobby scene, which can be improved of course, how to create a map using Unity's tile system, and lastly we'll look into how we can put in the tasks into actual map. So stay tuned. This video is split up into several parts that you can browse through the timestamps provided in the description below. Here we will start with the main menu, which is the initial point of entry to our game. Since this is mostly straightforward Unity UI, I will fast forward it. One thing to note here is that to ensure that the UI will scale on different resolutions, select the canvas and in the canvas scaler component choose scale with screen size and input the resolution for full HD. I'll also use some buttons that I have designed to make the menu look more interesting. As for the scripting part, we will use a simple script that will be rigged to the play and quit buttons. It will either take us to the lobby or quit the application. Another important part which I want to specify is that in order to be able to change scenes in Unity, we need to add them to the build settings. If you don't do this, you'll get errors while trying to change the scene. Don't forget to assign the buttons to the correct functions. Testing it will show that it works and it takes us to the next scene. And this is the final menu. By the way, this version is only available for the package owners. Now let's get to the lobby. Here, you don't actually need to do most of the changes. They are visual improvements to make the game look better. They are not mandatory, this is why I fast forwarded. The only important step here is adding the Start Game button. That will be needed for the server of the room to be able to start the game. In the lobby code, we will add a field to display the current location. We will need this instead of the debug log. This is mostly convenient for game builds where you don't have the debug console to test with. Also, don't forget to assign a field to the network lobby manager. If you get references to the room and the player list, we can enable and disable them because you only need one at a time. This will give a more clean look to our game.
While implementing, I got a lot of null references exceptions. This is why we need to protect against those with null checks in code. Don't forget when implementing the back button to disconnect the network, otherwise when you get back to the lobby you'll receive an error. If you were not interested in the visual updates, here is where you need to be careful because you'll create the start button. Now that start works, when we are in the game scene, the network script will try to connect us again to the network. We need to change this since the connection happens in the lobby now. Basically, we can create the player when the network script starts, since we know for sure that we are connected already. Now, to test the game, we need to go back to the lobby, create a room and play. This is inconvenient if we are working with the game scene, for example, on the map, and we need to playtest a lot. I got a small fix for creating a debug room, also available with the package. Next, we have some small updates from the previous tutorials. First, we will remove the player collisions, since this might create issues. We will do this by creating a player layer and assigning it to the player prefab. Next, we will disable the collisions in the project settings, Physics 2D. Moving on to the player movement. If we hold two arrows, for example up and left or down and right, we will notice that the speed doubles. This can be fixed by normalizing the vector in the movement script of the player. Last fix is for the camera. The problem is that the camera stutters when the player moves. To fix this, we need to change the camera update into fixed update. For the map, we will use a tile map. A tile map is a grid of fixed size, 32 by 32 for example. In this grid, each square represents one different texture or object. One grid element is called a tile, hence the tile map name. Why should we use tile maps? They have a couple of major advantages. The most big ones are that they are very easy to edit, and secondly, you can find a lot of free tile maps on the internet and start working on your maps right away. Now let's see how to create a tile map in Unity. Firstly, we will need to download two packages. The first one is called 2D Tile Map Editor. The next is called 2D Sprite. Be sure that you have the latest versions of both. To create a tile map, we first need to import a regular picture, of course containing a tile map format. We will make it a sprite 2D and sprite mode multiple. This is because the image contains multiple tiles. Unity provides a convenient sprite editor which you can use to automatically cut each tile. To use the tile map in the project, we first need to create a tile map object. Next, we will open the tile palette and create a new one. With drag and drop, we can add our tile map picture to the tile palette. I use the same folder to store everything for the tiles. And now simply we can select the tiles we want to use and start creating our map by placing them on the grid. They also come with pre-made collisions and we need to remove the collisions from the fourth tile. To make the collisions work with the player, we need to add the Tilemap Collider 2D component. We need to add the Tilemap Collider 2D component. The player prefab is a little bigger for the tile map. We can adjust this by changing the scale factor. Also, the collision shape needs to be adjusted because it will be too big. You can also change the camera size because it might be too far from the player now. I created a full map using the tiles that I made. Both are available in the asset package. We are heading into the last part of the tutorial, how to add the tasks to the main map. First, we will create a task object in the canvas and make sure that it's stretched all the way. Then we drag and drop all the task prefabs there. Be sure to disable them since you will use code to enable. For this we will need a couple of new scripts. Those are Intractable. which will be attached to the objects in the scene that will have a task associated to them. The other script is for the player, and it's the task interaction. We will start with the interactable, since this script is the smallest one and needed for the others. Here we need to specify which task to start, and the function that once called can start or disable a particular task. The UI script also needs additions. We will use a similar structure to killable component, but this time the interactable. Also, a new button called Use button will be enabled or disabled here. Lastly, we will create a function called ByTheUse button. This needs to trigger the interactable element, which will activate its task. Moving on to the biggest script, the task interaction, we will actually copy-paste a lot of code from the killable, since these two are very similar. First are the parameters, only the killable target gets changed. The awake is mostly similar with small changes. Don't forget to extend the mono behavior pawn as well. To detect if an object is in our range, we will use the search for killable but renamed with some tweaks. Besides changing all the types from killable to interactable, we need to assign to a new target in the UI controller to enable or disable the use button. Also, it would be nice if you get outside of the task range to disable it. This is possible if the selected target, that can also be null by the way, is different from the previous one, if a previous one exists. And if it does, we first need to disable that before initializing the target with the new value. In the scene, we need the objects that will trigger the tasks. They are simple game objects created in the scene. They contain a random sprite to show something on the screen. We will add the interactable component script to them. Also, the player prefab needs to have the task interaction script. I chose to put it parented to the player instead of directly on the player because it uses a line renderer and it would conflict with the line renderer for the kill functionality. Since we attached the task interaction, we can also specify a range for the player. Let's now go back to the main scene and create the use button. And now, if we test, it works. Not perfect, but it does. Good progress. The task also needs to be adjusted a little. We need to increase the scale to have a better visibility of it. In the code, we need to disable the game object if the task was successful. Now let's proceed to the card swipe task. I'll create elements for all three right now and then move towards the swipe. The card task needs to have some small adjustments. First, we need to make sure that no lights are turned on by default. Then, going to the code, we need to also disable the task if successful. Lastly, we will initialize everything in onEnable. This function is called whenever the game object gets enabled. Let's see if it works by testing them. And it's good to go. The most difficult task is to fix the wire one. We'll start by removing the debug logs. Next, we will need to move the functionality from start to on enabled for the same reason as the other previous task, since it's going to be run multiple times in the scene. If you run it, we will get into some errors. It seems that onEnable happens before the awake, which is used to initialize the wires. We can fix this by creating an initialize function instead of awake and calling it in the wire task. This way we can ensure that the execution order is correct. Trying the task now, everything works except the wires. If you haven't done this already, you need to set the camera's canvas render mode to screen space camera and provide the camera in the scene. We will need to create some new materials for the tile map and the player. Things will start to overlap soon, so we need to be careful. As you can see, there is clearly an overlapping issue. Let's first adjust the wire's width before changing the overlapping. Since there are many changes with the order of the overlapping, I provided this segment with all of them. Be sure to have everything in place as it's here. It's about the render order. Don't forget to add a disable in the wire task if it's successful. And since the wires have success as well, we need to make sure that they get initialized with success false. And this is the final wire task. It seems to work properly now.
We learned a lot in this episode, but the game is far from completion. So while the tutorials will be still coming, if you want to get notified, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to get informed when the new episode launches. I'm Adrian and I'm signing out.